Every time a new generation of Nvidia GPUs comes along, it is easy to focus on the powerful high-end models of each generation. The GTX 570, the GTX 1080, you get the idea. But in the shadows, with very little publicity, older generations used to release entry-level GPUs for a reduced price, identified in their model number as GT rather than GTX. The GT low-end GPUs were traditionally aimed at providing modest graphical capabilities at systems with limited power consumption, budget, and space, thus making it easier to do things like video or photo editing and some very light gaming, but they were never really targeted at hardcore gaming audiences. Nvidia stopped doing entry-level GPUs in 2014, probably because integrated GPUs were doing those tasks just fine. But something changed this year when Nvidia released the GT 1030, which is currently the most modern low-end GPU that has been released by Nvidia, usually sold for less than $80. And this thing is tiny. Put it next to any gaming GPU and it creates quite the contrast. A lot of it comes down to how little power it uses and therefore how little cooling it needs. You can straight up buy some of these with passive cooling, really amazing. If you're looking for raw power for the lowest budget, you can probably do better with buying an old gaming GPU like the one on my trashed up video in the corner. But if you're limited to a very anemic power source, or you want access to modern APIs such as DirectX 11 or 12 or Vulkan, then should you consider a GT 1030 to play modern games on 1080p? I pair it with a first generation i5 750, which is actually the best desktop CPU I currently own, to find out. Games like Overwatch work absolutely flawlessly over 60 FPS and do not even force the GPU so much, which is not a huge surprise given Overwatch's notorious GPU optimization, so let's try something a little bit less efficient. Like the notorious Nier Automata, one of the few games I have been unable to play on my older GT 640, and the source of a lot of anguish for PC gamers all around. As I have mentioned in the past, this game utilizes a very heavy global illumination method that can bring a GPU to its knees pretty quickly. On some specific areas of the game, this proved true for the 1030. Thankfully, you can reduce global illumination or downright disable it using the far mode, which I have talked about in this game's video, which gets us closer to a comfortable 30 FPS, which is not bad for 1080. Another game that I was curious to try was Dishonored 2, another notorious contender in the worst optimization category. With post-process effects disabled, as explained in my video about this game, it was surprisingly able to keep itself over 30 FPS. I must however point out that the game by default utilizes some clever tricks regarding dynamic resolution to maintain an FPS target, so a lot of these scenes are not properly being rendered on 1080, but I was still willing to mention this game due to how well it did. Next is PUBG. I have been looking for a setup to play more of this game on its super lower settings and a resolution of 1080, and to my surprise this did okay. The 1030 was able to maintain between 30 and 40 FPS while in open areas and closer to 50 inside buildings, which is not bad for a game with such drastic performance requirements. It's really hard to say what is good and what is bad in this game anymore. There are performance optimizations in the horizon for this game, so I might circle back to this one very soon. Now, as I mentioned before, one of the potential reasons for going with a modern low-end GPU rather than a potentially cheaper, older, high-end GPU is support of newer APIs. Doom is a really good example of this. As I explained on the video in the corner, Doom was one of the first major releases to support Vulkan, a render API that can potentially allow for less overhead and better performance. This is, of course, fully supported by the 1030, which leads to some really interesting results. There's still some instances in very heavy combat when you might see freezes or drops, but this is surprisingly mitigated by disabling most shadows. Great performance for such a frenetic game running on 1080. The final test I was interested on was Wolfenstein 2 on 1080 and shadows disabled. This game surprised me by being Vulkan only, which cuts off a number of older GPUs from even starting the game. Thankfully, the 1030 is able to get started, although it has a hard time with this game on 1080, even with shadows disabled. Using an adaptive internal resolution does seem to get the game closer to somewhere more playable, but it is not as good as it was in previous examples. So, should you consider a 1030 versus buying an older GPU? It would likely come down to priorities. You can get some decent mileage out of buying an older GPU, like the GTX 570 used on the trash stuff, for a smaller price, but that will require a better power supply unit since that uses 7 times the amount of power that the 1030 uses, and it takes a significant amount of space, so it might not even fit in a smaller case. Not to mention that it will not be able to reap the benefits of newer APIs. While it will be definitely interesting to do a full comparison between the 1030 and an older GPU that has more or less the same price, for now I would like your opinion. Is this a valid option for people under a budget? Or is the reduced power usage and small size a waste of time? Thank you to the people in Patreon whose donations allow me to buy devices like this for experiments. I will see you all on the next video.